Good afternoon, everyone. Please take your seats. Thank you. My name is Brooke Bowles, and I'm the Executive Director of the Levitt Jewish Community Center. Thank you for being here today. We are so glad you could join us for today's crucial program, Together Against Antisemitism. We're excited that we here at the center can present this program to all of you, thanks to funding by the Birmingham Jewish Federation, plus support from the Jewish Community Relations Council and the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. I would also like to recognize the following officials who are joining us today. Philip Ensler, I'm not sure if he's arrived yet, but he should be here any minute. Alabama State Representative for District 74, representing Montgomery. Philip is the only Jewish member of the Alabama State Legislature and the Executive Director of the Jewish Federation of Central Alabama. Ethan Weiss. Ethan is the District Director for Congressman Gary Palmer, who represents Alabama's 6th District. Representing Birmingham Mayor Randall Woodfin's office, we have Denise Gilmore. Denise is the Senior Director of the Division of Social Justice and Racial Equity. And we have Vestavia Hills City Council member Kimberly Cook, as well as her husband, Judge Greg Cook. Sometimes called the longest hatred, anti-Semitism is defined very simply as hatred against Jews. Just last year, anti-Semitism across the U.S. in its many ugly forms saw its highest record level since 1979. This is just part of an alarming upward trend in the number of hate crimes against minorities in our country, and these numbers are rising daily. From handing out free memberships during the Great Depression, to welcoming war refugees, to being the first institution in the city to allow women board members, to being a haven from discrimination for Jews, and for being the first to open our swimming pool and facilities to everyone, regardless of race, the J has long been a leader on the march to tolerance and justice. Having community as our middle name makes us champions of the Jewish values of Kahila, creating community, and Ada, enhancing community. I first heard Dov Wilker back in February at a national conference for JCCs in Atlanta. During Dov's session, another JCC leader stood up and said that he believed that Jewish community centers are one of this country's greatest answers to anti-Semitism because of the number of non-Jewish people we interact with in our hallways and we meet in our neighborhood and beyond. That, in turn, sparked an idea that led to all of you, roughly 250 of Birmingham's leaders, being here today to learn more about the threat posed by anti-Semitism. Seeing all of you here shows that we're still making history here at the J. And now on to our program. Sheri Falk has been a news anchor in Birmingham since joining the ABC affiliate in 2013. 3 years later, she joined the WVTM 13 news team as a weekday evening anchor. She came to Birmingham from Mississippi, where she'd spent 5 years as a weekday evening anchor and general assignment reporter. Sheri has been recognized several times by the Mississippi Associated Press and the Alabama Broadcasters Association for her work as an anchor and reporter. Most recently, she earned an Edward R. Murrow Award for her role in WVTM 13's coverage of last year's tragic shooting at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church in Vestavia Hills. You can catch Sheri on air weekdays at 5, 6:30, and 10 p.m. Sheri and Dov, please take the stage.
Thank you.
It's a big bench.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks so much for being here today. I have the pleasure of now introducing you to Dov Wilker. He's the Southeast Regional Director of the American Jewish Committee and the National Director for Black and Jewish Relations. And as most of you know, he came here from Atlanta today. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks so much for having. Well, that was loud. Thanks so much for having me. So it's always an honor to be in Birmingham, and especially to be with you today, Sheri, for this important topic.
Before we get into why we're here today, maybe let everybody know a little bit about you and who you are and your role with the American Jewish Committee.
Great. So I've been with American Jewish Committee for over 10 years now in my dual capacity representing the entire Southeast, as well as enhancing relations between the Black and Jewish communities. AJC, as a global Jewish advocacy organization for the Jewish people, really works to disrupt anti-Semitism and create a better understanding of the importance of Israel to the Jewish people, as well as the promotion of democratic values and human rights. Across the Southeast, we've been working with partners like the Birmingham community to better educate our partners in the government, in business, in religious institutions about the challenges and opportunities that we face as a Jewish community. Now, I will share that I'm not originally from the South. But I do consider but my mother is from Savannah, so I feel like I have a little Southern in me, as much as my daughters too were born in Atlanta. But it really is an honor to see the different communities across the Southeast and the impact that they have. And it's in communities like Birmingham that we have seen the greatest impact of the Jewish community, not just for ourselves, but for the community as a whole. And it's that message that I often try to convey to audiences so that they understand that we're not just about supporting ourselves. We do focus on our own community, but we focus on supporting the community as a whole because that's the right thing to do.
So today, this program is called Together Against Antisemitism. And anti-Semitism is a word that everyone has heard in their lifetime, but do most people truly know the definition of anti-Semitism and what it means beyond seeing a swastika painted on a building or a place of worship?
Yeah, so let's ask the audience actually that question, right? How many of you know what the definition of anti-Semitism is? Right, so about half, right? I think that's the first place that we really begin, right? Is that we have a sense and a feeling of what anti-Semitism is, but we don't necessarily know what it is, right? We know it when we see it, right? There's this feeling inside ourselves that something is uncomfortable. There's this feeling that that doesn't necessarily sound right. But oftentimes, unless it is a swastika at our front door or an anti-Semitic flyer, on the street, we might not know. So one of the key advocacy points for American Jewish Committee is actually the promotion of what's called the working definition of anti-Semitism. Now, there's a few copies of this on the table behind you for y'all to check when you leave, but this definition, it's called the working definition of anti-Semitism. And it was created in the European Union to help the EU define anti-Semitism because of what they were experiencing in the mid-2000s as a result of the Second Intifada. So the definition of and actually now this definition has been adopted over 1,100 times around the world by institutions, by governments, by corporations, by sports teams, by universities, all in an effort to help them guide their understanding of anti-Semitism. Because one of the things that you'll see with this definition is that there's a very brief definition at the top, right? It says anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews which may be expressed as hatred towards Jews. By the way, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews. Rhetorical and physical manifestations of anti-Semitism are directed toward Jewish or non-Jewish individuals and or their property, toward Jewish community institutions and religious facilities. So the definition is pretty self-explanatory. However, anti-Semitism is not that clear-cut, right? So what the definition did was add examples. Now, I'm not going to read these 11 examples to you, but the definition literally says contemporary examples of anti-Semitism in public life, the media, schools, the workplace, and the religious sphere could take into account the overall context, include but are not limited to. Right? Because we know that anti-Semitism is on the one hand very black and white and on the other hand very gray. So we created this definition as a way to understand what the gray area is for anti-Semitism. And yet still only roughly half the audience knows what anti-Semitism is. And it's not always as easy for us to say it's hatred towards Jews because guess what? Someone might do something that's anti-Semitic, right? Or someone might do something that you think is anti-Semitic, but the truth is, it wasn't, right? There was no intent behind it. They might not have known that you were Jewish, right? There's nothing anti-Semitic about it, but you might call it anti-Semitism. Now, one of the greatest questions that we often ask is, well, who gets to define it? Well, the person who gets to define it is actually the person who experienced it. And that's one of the biggest struggles that we face today as a Jewish community. Who defines anti-Semitism? Especially when it comes to Israel, right? There is a lot of gray area as it relates to people who are anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, and how they themselves perpetuate anti-Semitism. But the who gets to define it is really the biggest question for us. Each year, American Jewish Committee creates a survey on the state of anti-Semitism. And one year we asked the question about, who do you trust to define anti-Semitism? And the number was low when it came to trusting Jewish organizations. Right. So I am a paid professional within the Jewish community, and I feel very fortunate that I get to talk about being Jewish all day long, right? For better or for worse. My wife, I think, gets a little tired of it. My daughters definitely could sometimes give these talks for me because they've seen it so much. But the question asked them, who do you trust? And it said that the community the general population was not necessarily trusting institutions to define anti-Semitism. They'd rather define it themselves. And part of the effort that we are trying to undertake is to ensure that folks trust organizations like American Jewish Committee, like the Birmingham Jewish Federation, like the Jewish Community Relations Council, like the rabbis at synagogues, like this JCC, right? The institutions know. We know what's anti-Semitism, but we need support in people accepting our definitions. And it's always weird. It's hard at times.
So in your opinion, how would you say that it's different from other forms of hate, and how does it manifest itself into just daily conversations that somebody may think is just saying something benign and really it's beyond that?
Yeah, so the reason that anti-Semitism is different than other forms of hate is because A, it's the oldest form, and B, it manifests in so many different ways, right? People don't necessarily just hate somebody who's Jewish because they wear a yarmulke on their head, right? I wear this kippah as an identifier. I am not a religiously observant person. Yes, we go to synagogue. Yes, we keep kosher, but that's not why I wear the kippah. I wear it because it's an identifier. I want people to know that I'm Jewish, and I want to encourage others to wear things that identify them as being Jewish. But people don't necessarily hate me because I'm Jewish. They hate me because of what they perceive Jews to do, right? They hate me because they perceive that Jews are. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Oftentimes in today's society, people hate because of who somebody is, right? They hate black people because they are different. They hate Muslims because they are different. right? They hate gay people or LGBTQ or non-binary. They hate them because just they are different. They don't necessarily hate Jews because we are different. They hate Jews because what they believe we have created, right? What we have manifested, how they believe we control. That's why in the definition it's important. It says a certain perception. It's not a negative or a positive perception. It's a certain perception. So I'll share a similar story. Last year, or actually this year, we're in August, right? So September, where are we? We're sometime. School started, that's all I know. We're in the beginning of the school year.
We're almost to Labor Day.
We're almost, thank you, okay, good. Almost to September. And there's a bill in the state of Georgia to define anti-Semitism. And there's a state senator who said, I don't believe it's a certain perception. He said, I believe it's a negative perception of Jews. And we said, yes, but a positive perception of Jews can be anti-Semitic. He refused to accept that. Refused, right? Because he said, but it's only negative. And we said, so here's an interesting example to add on to it. Y'all have had the anti-Semitic flyers in Alabama, right? You've seen the stories. You might have even reported on them. Mm-hmm. So the group, I'm not going to name the group because that's part of what they want. They want their name out there. So a few months ago, that group was protesting outside a synagogue in Macon, Georgia. And they were protesting with the effigy of a rabbi with a rainbow tallis and a kippah, and it was horrifying for the community. And the community responded in the best way possible. They created a unity program, and about 900 people showed up at the church to support the Jewish community. And one of the speakers was an imam who is originally from Africa. And he got up there and he spoke, and he said very powerful words, very supportive words. And then he said, and we shouldn't be jealous of the Jews because they are successful in business. Now, yeah, right, like, yeah, it was a little uncomfortable. It was, like, and we know, so this is a good example, right? That was a positive perception of Jews. In his mind, right, Jews are successful, therefore we should look at this in the positive way, trying to emulate the Jewish community, right? And he's standing up this unity program. And and a handful of us in the back of the room start to cringe, as you all did a little bit. But that's a positive perception, right? Now, he was not thinking of this in a negative way whatsoever, but we know, right, Sheri, we know that people have used that to attack us, to hate us, to treat us differently, to single us out, right? And that's where that's why it's gray. That's why we need to understand sort of these examples of when they do come up in conversation in a way that you might not, feel comfortable with. But that's also why anti-Semitism, for the most part, is not malicious, right? There's a lot of anti-Semitism that's ignorant. I would even dare to say most anti-Semitism that we see today is ignorant anti-Semitism, right? Part of that's based off of people knowing Jews. Right? Most people, so our survey, I got props today. We produced a report on the state of anti-Semitism in America. And one of the questions in here, let's see if I can find it quickly, is percentage of people who know somebody who is Jewish. Here we go, I found it. Do you personally know someone who is Jewish? Do you know what the number is? How many people percentage of people who know somebody who's Jewish?
Well, I guess it would depend on the area you come from.
Okay, what do you think it is in the South?
Not very high.
Okay, well, give me a number.
I don't know.
What's the number?
I don't know. I don't know.
Okay, fine. All right, so.
Too much pressure.
Okay. So about 60% of folks in the Southeast know somebody who is Jewish.
Okay, so
right?
That's not bad.
60%.
Yeah.
But that means that 40% don't. 40. And my guess is, right, we're here in Birmingham. There's pockets of the community in Birmingham where it's going to be higher. I'm guessing around the center here, it's going to be higher. If people work down near, I don't know how to name.
More in rural areas, I would say, not so much.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, and one of the challenges we have is that as Jews move away from more rural communities, then people are less likely to know Jews. And actually, anti-Semitism in rural communities is higher, perhaps, than you might expect, in part because of that. So I like to share the story of Fitzgerald, Georgia. Have you ever been to Fitzgerald, Georgia?
I have not.
Anybody here been to Fitzgerald, Georgia? Show of hands. Okay, there's a handful of you who've been to Fitzgerald, Georgia. What? You knew the one Jewish family there, right, Joyce? There's one. Joyce knew that. But actually, one of the most prominent figures in American history, also happens to be American Jewish history, is a gentleman named Morris Abram. Morris Abram was from Fitzgerald, Georgia. There is a synagogue in Fitzgerald, Georgia. But the synagogue in Fitzgerald, Georgia today is really nothing, right? It's more of a museum because the families have moved away from Fitzgerald, Georgia. And so the remnants of the Jewish community has a positive impact, but it's still not impacting the community in the way that we would hope so that people know who Jewish people are. Mm-hmm. And we all know, right, to the question that you started with was what makes it different than other forms of hate. We all know that the easiest way to combat hate is to know somebody, right? To be able to break down that barrier, that perception, right? Because you know who people really are, what they believe. And so for us, that's a continuing challenge that we have. That's why in the workplace, it's so important that we lift up the voices in all of the diverse voices that we have, right? Whether they're Jewish, they're Muslim, they're Christian, the diversity of Christian denominations, right? Whether someone is Black, Latino, Asian, right? We all have elements of ourselves that are unique and that are positive and that are exciting that we can share, all in an effort to learn more. And so we have to find these opportunities to share them, find these ways to bring us all together.
And when it comes to that and finding those ways, in your opinion, how can we collectively, I guess, increase the awareness and understanding of it in our own speech and our daily conversations here in the South?
Yeah. So we know better than most people about terms that are used that are uncomfortable for us in the South, right? So the easiest one that I always cringe at saying myself, but like many of you have probably heard it when people say, I'm gonna Jew them down, right? It's a phrase that it's not uncommon, right? You might not hear it as much today, but yeah.
I have.
You have, right?
Yes.
It's there, it exists. And so when we hear those things, most people are not saying that maliciously, right? It's a figure of speech for them.
Right.
So it's the evolution of speech that we need to pay attention to. So when you hear someone say that, it's important to say to them, might not be the best phrase to use, right? Like, did you know? So the better way of saying it is, did you know that could be, that is offensive to some folks? And it's most people, again, are willing to accept that they've said something that they will struggle with. And by the way, they will probably continue saying it, but the next time they say it, they'll have a pause themselves. And so it's identifying, it's not, I don't want to say it's calling out, right? Calling out is an aggressive tactic, but it's making someone aware of the discomfort that has been created as a result of that language. And that's the key that we need to impress upon folks. That at the end of the day, there's 200 plus people in the room today, right? Each of us is responsible for helping to change this narrative, right? I can only do so much as a professional in the community. You can only do so much on the news, right? But each of us has a personal responsibility to help make that change in people. And we know that it works, right? We know that people evolve, they change, they want to change. Even those that don't want to change are still willing to change a little bit, right? So every time we address it, it makes it easier the next time. And they'll be more sensitive to who we are. And by the way, we shouldn't just be we should do it for Jews, but we should do it whenever we hear it for anybody. I mean, that's one of the ways that we think about society today. It's about conversation, right? All too often we live in bubbles. We live in political bubbles, we live in geographic bubbles, we live in societal bubbles, right? But we interact with different types of people all the time. I'm originally from New Jersey, and when I was in high school, I used to take the bus to go into New York City, where I'd take the subway. When I lived in Tel Aviv, I'd take the bus, right? Public transportation is one of the greatest assets in the world today because it forces interaction between people in the smallest of ways, right? It's one of the challenges. I love my car. I want to be very clear about this. I love my car. I love the solitude of my car. I love being able to listen to whatever I want. But actually, one of the challenges that it has created is a lack of connection and interaction between people. Mm-hmm. And so we need to find those little moments at the grocery store, at the restaurant, in the library. People should all read books. You should go to the library. As you're watching and discussing Sheri's broadcasts on the news with your friends, right? Each of these is another opportunity to change someone's way of thinking just a little bit, or giving them insight into something otherwise they might not have seen.
So the next thing I wanted to, in a previous conversation, you brought up the term code switching.
No.
I had never heard that term before, but once he explained what it meant, I realized that I myself, as a Jewish person in this community, and just throughout my life, had done that several times. So my question first to all of you is, have any of you heard the term code switching before? If you have, raise your hand.
Oh my God, wow.
Wow, so a lot
That's
more.
it's a lot larger than I would have expected.
Okay, well, for those of you that have not, it's pretty interesting. It's an interesting term.
Yeah, so code switching is the idea that you behave one way in a public setting and you behave differently in a private setting. So language that you might use at home, you are not using in public, or even the way that you speak, right? The general tone of your voice, the intonation of your words, literally all of those little micro aspects of your being, you're willing to do in one space, but not willing to do in a public space because of how it will reflect upon you and how someone's perception of you might change as a result of that switch. I think I did a good job. Did I do a good job defining it? Yeah, I got some nods. Okay, thank you. Wait, so what was the question though? I forgot.
Basically, to tell people what that is, that term.
Yeah.
It's an interesting term,
Yeah.
and I was just fascinated to learn, hey, I do that.
Yeah,
Or I have done that.
Right, I think we all do it a little bit, right?
It doesn't just apply to us.
Right.
Yeah.
And it matters. You know, think of what that actually does to you psychologically, right? We don't. You know, I have a colleague who just graduated with a master's in, I always get it wrong, but it's organizational development and learning. She had a focus on, her focus was on ADHD in the workplace, which is a fascinating topic to discuss at a whole different conversation. But she talks to me a lot. She reads lots of books on sort of the neuroscience and impact that these types of instances have on us. So every time that you code switch, you actually are sort of setting yourself back a little bit. It does something to the neurons in your brain to impact you in a negative way. It creates sort of, it changes the way that we behave, and ultimately what it will do is change you, right? Because you'll stop using and speaking that way at home, right? Because you're trying to fit in a way that's uncomfortable. And so you change. And code switching it's not the most common talked about phrase in the Jewish community, but it is very common in other communities. Very common. And remember I said to you, you should talk to your co-anchor about it, right?
Yes. So my co-anchor, Guy Rawlings, he's African American, and I went back to work after we had this conversation, and I asked him about it, and he said, absolutely, I know what that is. And he basically told me the same definition of it as you, and said that he had done that quite often in his life as well.
Yeah, and so we know people that do it, and we've almost accepted it as a part of society, right? And so if we think about, you know, how we use that for our own selves, right? So it's important that we acknowledge this and almost encourage people to sort of revert, right? To be open and honest about who they are. Nobody should have to hide themselves. You shouldn't have to hide a piece of yourself to fit in. And we all do, right? We all do it. I mean, we wear certain clothes, we speak a certain way, we eat certain foods. All of these things are done in an effort to fit into the greater society, right? And on the one hand, it creates a general uniformity in society. But what we have found in the Jewish community is that being a part of the general community and losing that identity has actually negatively impacted us, right? If people don't know we're Jewish, then guess what? They might plan a big meeting or program on Yom Kippur, which this year is on a Monday, right? Yom Kippur is on a Monday. That's awful. It's painful, right? Because guess what Tuesday is going to be like in the workplace? Not fun for us. You're going to be angry, a little annoyed. You're going to be tired. You're going to feel, by the way, I know that at least one rabbi is here, right? Like, you're going to be uplifted spiritually because of the experience of Yom Kippur, right? Like, let's be, right? We should all be very honest about this. Like, that's the key here is, and yet it's going to impact you slightly differently on Tuesday.
Yeah.
And so, but if someone doesn't know that you're Jewish, and you don't tell them, and then they plan something, and then you get annoyed at them because they planned something, well, on the one hand, you only have yourself to blame, right? We have to take responsibility for ensuring that people are aware of the things that are important to us, right? Jewish holidays, especially Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, are important to us. We don't expect the whole world to change, but if they can accommodate us a little bit, like, that's okay. And that's, the JCRC has it's a 5-year calendar, right? A 5-year calendar of major Jewish holidays on that back table, right? That's a great resource to bring back to your workplace, to let people know that that these are important dates, and that either A, we should be educating people about what they mean to us, or maybe we should reconsider what it is that we have on those dates so that we are being inclusive of our Jewish team members. And I think that's very important for us all to remember, right? And yet the actual, I learned this recently, the Army has a list of every single holiday, and they grant special permissions to every single holiday, not just for Jews, like all religions. Like we have examples of that. We don't have to make things up on our own, right? The military does a tremendous job of actually supporting religious diversity, right? We should use that as an example for us. But we have to remember to be ourselves, to remind people who we are, to remind ourselves of who we are. This is actually sort of it's a challenging story. Jewish people interrupt. Did you know that? Nobody, I mean, you're not interrupting me. I appreciate it, by the way. I was waiting for you to interrupt me. That was like a softball for you, Sheri. But that is a cultural aspect of being Jewish, right? It's not done out of animus. It's done, I don't know the actual historical reason for why we interrupt as much as we do, but if you think about it, the history of Jewish text study is one of debate. Right? So the history of Jewish text study is one based on conversation between two individuals with the text itself and with the commentary of the text. So essentially you've got 3 people in this conversation. You've got you, you've got me, and you've got the text and the commentary. Right? And what we do is we debate this. And so we interrupt because we're challenging our initial thoughts. And so culturally, especially in the South, interrupting people is not the appropriate thing to do, right? But there is a connection that we have to it, right? And I don't expect everybody to go into work the next day and just say, I want you to give me a pass when I interrupt you because I'm Jewish. Like that's what I see is what's going to happen here. But what you can do is you can sort of use that as a way to explain to somebody why you behave in a certain way, right? Because context matters. History matters. Our stories matter. And it's important for us to get that and share that with folks so that they know who we are in a much larger way.
All right, well, on the topic of workplaces, we all know racism has gone up significantly over the past few years. And because of that, many corporations have responded with employee resource groups and diversity, equity, inclusion programs. And it seems like it's been a great initiative. I know my company has really taken the charge on that, Hearst Corporation. And it's been great, but many Jewish people feel like they've been left out of that or sort of forgotten.
Yep.
Why is that? And also, how can, moving forward, DEI leaders or anybody in a company really make an effective impact and change that?
Yeah. So I think it's important that we acknowledge why we're in the place around DEI that we are. And it's very important, right? The social justice protests of 2020, what happened to George Floyd was sort of a key turning point in our communities in the United States understanding of sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? Bringing awareness into the workplace. Very, very positive. But many communities, but the Jewish community in particular, felt left behind in that topic. Because we were, right? We were talking about one community as opposed to the challenges that many communities face. And so for the Jewish community, we have been discriminated against for centuries. Now, today in the United States, Jewish community is accepted in a way that 50 years ago, we absolutely weren't. In fact, yesterday I was at coffee with someone who shared the story with me. The gentleman is from Charleston, South Carolina, and he said to me that when his father got out of the Army, he wanted to go to medical school. But the medical school of South Carolina only accepted 2 Jews a year. 2. So he went to law school because he didn't want to wait till the next year, right? Emory University is in Atlanta, Georgia. Emory had to officially apologize for its discrimination in the dental school against Jews, right? There were quotas up until the 70s against Jews in academia, right? This is in people's lifetimes, right? This is not, I want to be very clear, this is not an oppression Olympics, right? I'm not trying to say that what we experience is worse than any other community, but it's real. And it has a lasting impact on our community and on the decisions that we make, right? Even I live in Atlanta. There is a country club that's around the corner from me. I live in sort of the center of town. And I have a board member who said to me when he was starting out as a young CPA that the head of the firm, who really liked him, he had inquired with the head of the firm about joining the club, and he goes, "Oh, we don't let your kind in here." That gentleman is not, I think he's 55, right? So this happened 30 years ago, right? It's not the Holocaust, right? But it is discrimination in the United States, right? It is discrimination that has impacted our family and friends, and we in the South know it as well as anybody, right? It's why the march in Charlottesville in 2016 was so painful, right? Because what were they saying? The Jews will not replace us, right? 2016, people were out in public saying that. Now, why anybody would want to replace those people is a whole different question, right? Like, whoa, no. But we always know, we've always been seen as different. And I think that's on the DEI space, one of the challenges, is that Jews have always been seen as the other, right? It's not a hierarchy, but when it comes to it, I know that when I first started in this work in 2005, I would introduce myself to someone who was white. And the moment I told them that I was Jewish, they look at me and go, that's interesting. Right? They look at us differently. We are as much as we are accepted, there's always something a little bit different. And so I think that's why in the DEI space, it became challenging for many within the Jewish community. So what can be done? Right? One of the key things, as I've shared, is to ask your Jewish friends and colleagues, what's something interesting about the Jewish community, about the holidays that you've got coming up, right? This is holiday season for us. This is actually the best time to do it, right? There's Rosh Hashanah, apples and honey. There's Yom Kippur. There's fasting, right? There's Sukkot. It's a harvest festival. Why do some people have these weird shacks in their houses, right? Then you get to Hanukkah. It's the holiday, right? Like we have things that we can share, and it's not, this isn't about being hated against, right? This is just sharing, apples and honey. Everybody likes apples and honey. Maybe for the Jews here, bring apples and honey to your place of business. Share it with your colleagues as a way to make them a part of your rituals and customs, right? Invite the rabbi to come and talk about it. These are the types of things that we have to do. It's not all about giving the stats of how 63% of religious-based hate crimes in the United States target Jews, more than any other group. There's a difference between sharing the stories of people hating us and sharing the positive stories of who we are as a community. And one of the biggest things that we do not do as a Jewish community is share enough about the positives, right? I love Jewish holidays. I really do. It's one of my favorite things because of the food, because of the community that's created, because of the meals that I have, because of the weight that I am going to gain, and then the need to go to the gym afterwards, right? Like all of these things, it's a cycle here, right? We are always accepting ourselves into this cycle. So it's important that we share it from the pot, because there's also a story. And by the way, there's the differences from the, specifically on the DEI side, right? The Jewish community is not all white appearing, right? There are black Jews, there are Latino Jews, there are Persian Jews, there are African Jews, there are Latin American Jews, right? There are Jews from Portugal who have different customs and rituals, right? Part of this is also about sharing the diversity of our own community, right? 12 to 15% of the Jewish community are Jews of color. 12 to 15%. That's not small. It's not. But if we're not talking about it, then nobody's going to talk about it. So how do we talk about it? How do we share the different cultures and foods and rituals that we have, right? How many of you at Passover throw water at the people as if during the 10 plagues, as we're walking across the Red Sea, right? Like we do weird things, right? We do. There are people who do it.
And
like,
eat some weird things.
And eat some weird things too. I actually had. I was
not so weird to us anymore.
Exactly. I mean,
Gefilte fish.
gefilte fish is weird. I love it, but it's weird. I'm
shaking his head like, yeah.
I once had, we once hosted a dinner in Atlanta with a Mexican Jewish chef who's got a TV show on PBS, I believe. It's called Cooking with Patty. Patty Hinich is her name, if anybody knows. She makes a chicken matzo ball soup with jalapenos. Yeah, did you hear that? Yeah. It was delicious. Right? She used a different type of fish for her gefilte fish. Right? Like culturally, we really do. We adapt, right, to the communities where we live. So, I don't know how many of you have cornbread at your Rosh Hashanah meal, but like, it wouldn't be surprised to me if some of you did. So we try to, include our local cultures into our Jewish rituals and customs. But we have to remember to share that outside, because if we're not sharing it, then how can we expect people to know? We have to talk about it so people will know. That's why I'm so grateful all of you came today, because I get to tell some of these anecdotes that I don't often get to share.
Another question about that, just in your opinion, going back to the DEI, do you think that part of it could be that it's not so inclusive because many people think that Judaism is just a form of religion, not an ethnicity?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, that's a very big misconception that I have personally run into as well.
Yeah, that's right. We're not, we're sort of, it's my new phrase is that we are a peoplehood. Now, I have no idea what that means.
But it sounds good.
But it sounds good. No, but it's more inclusive, right? It's not just a religion. It's not just an ethnicity. We are a people. There is a common bond between us. No matter where we travel in the world, my family and I always go to the synagogue, right? Always stop by to see it. And the little Hebrew that I have, well, I have a lot, but the little Hebrew that my daughters have enables them to communicate with the folks at the synagogue And that's unique, right? That's special. And what other, well, actually, if you speak Latin and you know Latin, you can probably go to a Catholic church in any country, right? So there is a unifying language there, but Latin is a dead language. Hebrew was brought back to life. And so we have found ways to stay connected as a people. And so it's hard for people to understand. It's hard for people to understand. It's hard for folks to understand that we are not just a religion, that we have this culture and this ethnicity to us that seems foreign because of the diversity, because of how diverse we actually are.
And in your experience, have you seen successful changes within corporations regarding all of this?
Absolutely.
And what are some of them?
Absolutely. Look, the easiest thing to point out is the recognition of Jewish holidays and dates, right? Making sure that we're not scheduling big meetings on dates that are important to us. There's a school that, scheduled class photos on Yom Kippur. So then they found out, they moved the date, right? There was someone who, there was a company that was understanding some of the issues that the Jewish community was having related to the food that they had in the cafeteria. So they added in more, kosher style food, more vegetarian food. It's a little bit different today because we have so much vegetarian, gluten-free, vegan food. But even up until 5 years ago, having accessible, I don't eat pork, right? I don't eat bacon. I don't eat anything that's got pig. And living in the South, that is very hard.
Especially with barbecue.
Especially with barbecue. Going to a barbecue thing was the worst.
Yeah.
Because all they would have was coleslaw and cornbread. Now, I love coleslaw and cornbread. But, I'd want some protein. Give me some barbecue tofu. Help me out here.
Barbecue tofu?
I
don't know if you want that.
I don't know. But the mac and cheese, often have bacon in the mac and cheese.
Right.
So I've seen corporations change some of the foods that they have had in their cafeterias to be more accommodating to the community. It's the little things that matter. People appreciate those little things, right? Just as you might, but again, I go back to, it's important for us to say something. You can't just I really do believe this. We can't just sit there and brood that they served the mac and cheese with bacon again. If you don't say something, you can't expect anything to change. You have to use your voice. That's why you have it.
The Biden administration in June came out with a national action plan, and it was to combat anti-Semitism. And there's 4 pillars to that plan.
Yep.
I know it's pretty early on, hard in 2.5 months for you to say really that anything has made a tremendous difference. But are you seeing it being implemented anywhere?
Yeah.
What are you seeing?
Yeah, so the Biden administration came out with this plan, the 4 pillars. I have my notes so I can tell you exactly what the 4 pillars are. Hold on one second. Make sure I get the right list. I don't have the list, whatever. I'll get it for you afterwards. One of the things that but the pillars include increasing awareness about anti-Semitism in Jewish Americans, improving safety for Jewish institutions, called on bridge building between communities, and the 4th one I will remember at the end after I've already driven home to Atlanta.
I can't help you here. I only have pillar 1 and pillar 2.
You only have pillar 1 and pillar 2?
I do. I'm sorry.
All right. I wrote it down. I really wrote it down so I wouldn't forget, and of course I can't find my notes. So we've seen a number of key things take place. So the plan is a 12-month plan, but the USDA has already acknowledged that they're going to increase accessibility for kosher food for folks on food stamps. The military has talked about showcasing the impact of Jewish Americans. The Small Business Administration is going to be providing guidance to small businesses on identifying and calling out anti-Semitism. Part of the plan is to educate and work with local governments. So AJC has created a resource for mayors for how to address anti-Semitism. There are 40, this is a challenge that we live in society of bureaucracy. There's 40 different federal institutions that have a responsibility, and some have overlapping priorities, but you need to address each individually. So it's about identifying those, but there's 200 action steps, 100 points, and that 100 additional points that corporations and schools can undertake to address anti-Semitism. So part of what we're doing is trying to promote this idea throughout civil society to address anti-Semitism in all attempts that they can. And our hope is that through the successful implementation of this plan, that it'll impact the administration's ability to create similar plans for other communities too, right? The plan, and whether you like the administration or not, there are points in the plan that have to be accomplished. If we are not all working to end and to disrupt anti-Semitism, then we are doing ourselves a disservice. It doesn't matter who created the plan. It doesn't. There are things in the plan that we can all agree with. And in today's political world, that's very important for us to remember. It's hard. It's hard. I acknowledge that. We live in a more divided political society than we ever have before. So we have to embrace these opportunities when we have, because a clear decision was taken. Now, here's something very important to know, because I've spoken to a number of folks about this. We are very fortunate that Deborah Lipstadt is the special envoy to combat anti-Semitism. How many of you are familiar with Deborah Lipstadt? Okay, she is a Holocaust historian at Emory University. Her position is housed within the State Department, which means that her job is to advise foreign governments, right? It is an external position. There is no internal, domestic-looking position in the US government to address anti-Semitism, right? A position was created because of the rise of anti-Semitism globally, not in the United States. We now have to take this opportunity to encourage the administration to create a domestic-looking position, because that's clearly part of the purpose of the plan, is to focus, and the primary purpose of the plan is to address anti-Semitism in the United States. So when we meet, there's a representative, somebody from Representative Palmer's office, right? We need our local members of Congress to help address this. We need our mayor to address this. We need our county commissioners to address this. We need everybody to embrace this, because we really do believe that by embracing this, this will not only help us, the Jewish community, it will help the community at large. Because, question for all of you, does anti-Semitism just address the Jewish community? How many of you say yes, it only impacts the Jewish community? Right, not a single hand went up. How many of you believe that anti-Semitism impacts the entire community? Exactly, that's the answer. That's why anti-Semitism needs to be addressed. That is why this plan is so important. That's why we all need to be involved in the effort to ensure its implementation. Am I over time? I heard that somebody's watched me, but told me. No, I'm sure I'm fine. It's a bad joke. Nobody caught it.
I didn't either, because I was just asking her if we were out of time.
We're out of time. I can keep going. This is really dangerous. But we're having fun.
Yes, we are.
So that's the overall view, though, of the plan, right? We all have to be involved. It can't just be AJC or the JCC or the Federation or the CRC. Each one of us needs to read the plan. We need to know what's in it. By the way, it'll make us more intelligent about what issues we're facing today, right? The plan brought together thousands of hours of consultation. Mm-hmm. So experts from around the world were brought in to address it and to help the White House create it. So how many of you read? Right? It's 51 pages, people. It's not going to be the most exciting page-turning read. I can't lie to you, but it's important, right? Maybe you bring it. So this is going to be my favorite. Rabbi, I apologize. I encourage each of you to bring a copy of the plan to synagogue on the upcoming holidays. And if you ever need a distraction from the page of the Siddur or the Machzor, you can, the Jewish prayer book that we use in the holidays, consider reading the plan. Being in synagogue is not, I really do apologize for this, but it's true. Being in synagogue is about spiritual fulfillment, I do believe, but it's also about personal education, right? It's about learning something new. We always learn something new every year that we are in synagogue. The rabbis give a sermon about something that's different each year, right? We owe it to ourselves to continue to use this as an opportunity to learn. By the way, I hope that those of you at churches will maybe have some copies at your churches, right? This is not, again, limited to the Jewish community. Perhaps you want to have a copy of, of it at your mosque, at your workplace, right? Share it with folks. Let people know that it's important to you. It all goes back to the same thing. We need to spread the message. We need to ensure that people are aware so that they can help us be a part of the change that we want to see in our society.
And by the way, if you don't want to read 50 pages, there's a shorter version.
There you go.
Whitehouse.gov.
There you go.
That breaks it down for you, the main 4 pillars. And it's pretty interesting to read. That's the one that I read.
There you go. See? It's there. So we'll give you the 3-page version of it, the 4-page version. Yeah.
In conclusion and wrapping this up, you've shared a lot today, but is there any main key point that you want people to take back to their workplace or back into their communities today? If there was one important thing that you would like to share with people or for them to take home, what would it be? Pressure, no pressure.
Sure. Like, I was trying to think of like one word answer.
Oh.
You have to speak up. That's it. I think at the end of the day, we can only expect change if we help to make it ourselves, right? The anecdotes of the little things to do, right? The inviting someone to talk about it, the speaking up, the sharing of dates, we have this wonderful tool called Translate Hate. It's a glossary of anti-Semitic terms, right? You have to be educated on what some of them are. Some of them will surprise you. I did not know that, no, where was it here? Scapegoat, right? Scapegoat has an anti-Semitic origin to it, right? It actually stems from the Bible. And I happened to speak at synagogue 2 years in a row when the Torah portion was all about scapegoating. But there's oftentimes that we don't think about the origins of the terminology that we use. And so we need to continue to educate ourselves. So we have to speak up. We have to let people know. We have to be proud to be, you got to be proud to be Jewish. I've given you like 7. I'm a terrible guest. You got to be Jewish. If you're Jewish, you need to be proud to be Jewish, right? You have to let people know. You have to wear your Star of David, wear your Chai necklace, wear your yarmulke out in public. Let people know that you are. It's the easiest way to let people know that you're proud to be Jewish.
All right. Yeah.
Questions?
Is there anybody that has any questions? How about you, ma'am?
Would you please discuss anti-Semitism as it manifests in relations to Israel?
Yeah, absolutely. So the question was, could I discuss how anti-Semitism manifests itself in relation to Israel? So anti-Zionism and anti-Israel sentiment is oftentimes a disguise for anti-Semitism. Now, one of the things we say is that legitimate criticism of the Israeli government is not anti-Semitic. And all you need to see are the protests every week of the 150,000 plus people in the streets of Israel, or the thousands of people across the United States and around the world who are protesting the current Israeli government on judicial reform. None of that is anti-Semitic, right? That is all about legitimate criticism for the state of Israel. But the moment that people start calling Israel a racist state, accusing Israel of genocide against the Palestinians, painting swastikas, calling Israeli leaders Nazis, sort of creating these analogies between what Israel is doing and what Nazis did to Jews, or calling Israel an apartheid state. All of these are ways that people disguise. I really do believe this, by the way. People disguise their hatred for Jews because Israel is the only Jewish state in the world, right? People criticize Israel as a way to hate Jews. Now, again, there is legitimate criticism, but when you're talking about how Israel is, what Israel is doing with its people, with its government. If you're challenging the government, that's one thing. But when you're just calling Israelis as a whole or Jews as a whole, if the synagogue here or if the JCC was vandalized for something that Israel did, that is anti-Semitism, right? So it's important that we are very clear that there is a gray area. I will acknowledge that there is a gray area. Not all criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic, but most of it is.
All right, the next one was, as a Jewish person new to the South, I'm struck by the fact that some people want to convert me to their faith. I find it uncomfortable, but I know that they mean well. And to what extent, sorry, I'm trying to read here.
Yeah, no.
To what extent should Jewish leaders work to ask people not to proselytize to Jews?
Yeah. So I absolutely think that we should be asking people not to proselytize Jews. I think it's very simple. In fact, is there anybody here who is a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints? Okay. So I'll share a story. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, otherwise known as Mormons, had a process of posthumously converting Jews, right? So, and especially at Holocaust sites, right? So it was an engagement with the church that enabled us to explain to them why that was hurtful, why we were challenged by that, why we did not like that. So we absolutely need for people to understand why trying to convert us is anti-Semitic. And the reason I hesitate a little bit on the terminology is because, for the most part, people don't understand, right? This goes back to education, right? How are people learning about what the actions that they face, how it might offend us? And we do experience that type of anti-Semitism more in the South than anywhere else, right? But you disagree with me. You disagree? You can disagree with me.
Anti-Semitism is hate.
Yeah.
When a Christian wishes to save you,
Yes. Out of love.
it's not based on hate.
It's not based on hate.
No. It's
Correct.
based on caring and worry for your soul.
So the woman in the front is sharing that it's based on the proselytization is based on a caring for love and caring for the soul, not hate. However, even if it is not hateful, it can still be offensive and uncomfortable for us as Jews.
Then
And
we need to educate ourselves how to deal with that.
that's I accept your suggestion. However, it is still okay for someone who is doing something out of love and affection for us can still be uncomfortable and seen as anti-Semitic. And I think but it goes back to the same idea that we must educate and say, why is it that I do not believe that way? Right? So it's definitely a challenging one.
All right. Is anti-Semitism a civil rights issue?
Absolutely. Anti-Semitism is a civil rights issue, right? Jews continue to be hated, right? We continue to be discriminated against. And it's part of the overall effort to address civil rights is to ensure that we are all treated equally. And as long as we are being hated, then we are not, and discriminated against, then we are not being treated equally. I tried to go shorter so you can ask more.
No, that's fine. I'm sorry.
I'm
Forgive
handwriting,
me,
I'm
but
sure.
I'm trying to, forgive me.
Decipher, yeah.
Yes. This one's, part of it's scratched out, so I'm not really sure what the question is, but the part that's not scratched out says, I'm assuming they want you to discuss the relationship with the SPLC and the AJC.
So we do not have a close relationship with the SPLC, is the Southern Poverty Law Center. I understand that they are under new leadership. I understand they're even perhaps relocating out of Alabama in some way. Oftentimes the SPLC does a lot of research into extremist groups.
That's okay.
And so they offer valuable insight, but I wouldn't say that we agree with 100% of their analysis at times.
Isn't it perpetuating stereotypes to say that we interrupt? When you told the person that you were Jewish, they said, "Oh, but we are different."
Yeah, no, look, I accept that. Look, perpetuation of stereotypes is hard. And I use that word intentionally, right? Like, you know, Seinfeld, right? You snicker, there's a little bit of snickering, but it's true, right? Like, there's a lot of stereotypes about Jews that we acknowledge as almost being acceptable, right? There's some that we don't like. There are negative stereotypes that we don't like, right? And there are positive stereotypes that we are perhaps willing to accept. I would say that we interrupt people is, I'm not sure how many people associate that with being Jewish, to be honest. I think that people view interruption much more as a rudeness than, maybe I'm trying to give myself a pass. I'm from New Jersey. Like, there's only, I always, it's not everything is 100% clear, right? So here's an interesting one that Bradley Cooper, the actor, there's been a little controversy recently over the size of the prosthetic nose that they gave him to portray Leonard Bernstein, right? Like, now everybody came out and said that that wasn't anti-Semitic, right? And in part because it was done in cooperation with the family. It was everybody was involved and supportive of this effort. However, a few years ago, there was a political ad in Georgia that made our then candidate John Ossoff enlarged his nose. That was anti-Semitic, and that was an anti-Semitic stereotype. So there are times when things are done in a way that it's not always the same. We don't always have the same answer. You know, being Jewish is about nuance. It is, and we are very bad at black and white. I kind of wish that we were better at black and white, actually. But that's not the way that we as a Jewish community have evolved. Just look at the commentary on the Torah. How many rabbis have a commentary on the Torah? Everybody gets to raise their hand on this one, right? You all get your own perspective. It's one of the positive stereotypes to be, we all, 2 Jews, 3 opinions, right? It creates a challenge for us. And at the same time, we have to be willing to accept someone's version versus another. So, you know, what someone sees as anti-Semitism is as proselytizing, others might recognize why someone might be doing that and feel differently about it.
Next question is, they're talking about the pillars. Reversing the normalization of anti-Semitism. How do we support that effort on a local level, particularly among our youth?
Oh, yeah. Children, we have a huge problem in schools. We have a huge problem with young people. We have a huge problem with social media. Right? All of these are problems for us. So we need to work with schools so that they understand when something anti-Semitic has been said. In Metro Atlanta, there's been at least one anti-Semitic incident in every school district over the past 12 months. And my guess is that it's probably closer to one at every school in the past 24 months. But schools are not responding in the ways that we would hope that they would. They oftentimes brush things under the rug, right? The news could be all over the fact that some kids carve swastikas into the mirrors of the bathroom, right? But the school might not do anything. They might, and they are less likely to use it as an educational opportunity. In fact, we see a rise in anti-Semitic incidents when schools are teaching about the Holocaust. Right, let that sink in for a second. I know the Alabama Holocaust Education Center is here, so Lisa will either disagree with me politely or agree with me in the positive. She agrees with me, right? We see these in part because children think it's funny, right? So the question around how we teach about the Holocaust to our children, and not just teaching about the actual what happened, but how we frame how people behave after learning about it is really important, right? We can't just let students go there to learn and then leave it, right? Schools unfortunately have so much information that they have to provide that they move so quickly from one subject to the next. So we need to create opportunities for folks to sit with and reflect on what they have learned and how taking that information and then joking about it could be and is hurtful towards others.
What is your opinion of the Sabeel Peace Movement, which supports peace in the Middle East?
I find that the Sabeel Peace Movement, which is run by the Presbyterian, to be an anti-Semitic movement because it does not recognize the Jewish state of Israel.
And for those out there that might not be familiar with that, can you elaborate a little bit more?
So if I got it wrong, by the way, if the person who asked the question wants to write a little follow-up, so there is a movement within the Presbyterian Church that is under the banner of Sabeel that has been that has defended terrorism against citizens of Israel and does not seek a two-state solution or a peaceful coexistence with the Jewish state of Israel. And so that is the number one tenet. You know, when it comes to Israel, and this topic is not just about Israel today, obviously it's not even a majority about Israel, but when it comes to Israel, right, the Jewish community is the first to stand up and say, we believe in a two-state solution. We believe, the majority, I would say, believes in a two-state solution, believes in a Palestinian and Israeli state, Jewish state of Israel living side by side, right? Unfortunately, much of the criticism towards Israel does not speak of a two-state. They speak of one state. And they don't speak of what's going to happen the day after, right? Israel in 1948 had 700,000 Jews. By 1955, there was about 1.7 million Jews. Because of all of the Jews of North Africa and the Middle East that were forced out of their countries to go to Israel because of the creation of a Jewish state. Now, you can discuss in much greater depth about Muslim-Jewish relations and the history of Jewish communities in the Middle East where they had been for centuries. By the way, the synagogue right now there's a whole issue related to the synagogue in Mosul, Iraq, around the future of it. And I liken it a little bit for a different reason to synagogues in small Jewish towns, small southern towns, right? We have left the small towns, we've left the synagogues. What has become of those institutions? So Israel has done more to absorb Jews and attempt to create a cohesive community more than was ever thought possible. And it was from the Jews of the Middle East, it was from the Jews of Ethiopia, it's been from the Jews of Russia, it's been of the Jews of North America, right? We have come from all over to become and create a Jewish state of Israel living side by side with its neighbors, which, by the way, is in Israel's Declaration of Independence. So anything that does not seek to have and maintain a Jewish state, to me, is anti-Semitic.
And I want to read this one, but I'm having a little bit of a hard time. So whoever wrote this question, if I'm not repeating it right, please help me out. Why is there a need to have and focus on the Jewish and Black communities? What is the historical context surrounding it? And then there's more to the question, which I'm having trouble kind of.
So so I guess that's questioning why I have it's questioning in the positive way why I have a second part to my job. So the Black and Jewish communities have historically in the United States fought together to advance civil rights, right? And I don't want to overstate it, right? We did fight together, and there have been ebbs and flows in the relationship. And by the way, my organization has a department for Latino Jewish affairs. We have a department for Asian Jewish affairs. We have Muslim Jewish affairs. We have Christian Jewish. So we have Catholic Jewish. So it's not just about Black Jewish. I just happen to be responsible for Black Jewish. In the South in particular, Black Jewish relations has been a thing, right? I know from personal experience that my family in Savannah, that my grandparents had a store and they served and supported the Black community in an area that was not welcoming to the Black community, right? I know that my uncle desegregated the Chatham County school system. This coming Saturday is the 60th anniversary of the March on Washington. It is no coincidence that 2 of the 15 speakers were rabbis. In fact, the person who spoke just before Martin Luther King did was Rabbi Joachim Prinz, who fled Nazi Germany to come to the United States. So it is about an identification and a shared struggle that we have had together. Now, it is fair and important to acknowledge that there has been a schism in that relationship. While there have been many who have sought to maintain, there have also been many who have sought to divide. And one of the biggest challenges that we have today is, in fact, the role that Louis Farrakhan has played and the Nation of Islam has played in influencing a negative perception of Jews. And that has led to issues with the broader, larger black community, in particular those in the entertainment industry. It's very unfortunate what we have seen the influence of Louis Farrakhan be. And so the work of Black-Jewish relations is to remind us and understand the historical connections, as well as ensure that we are continuing today in relationships so that we know, again, we know who each other are, we know what our similarities and differences are. We can fight together in the shared work to combat racism. We can fight together in the shared work to disrupt anti-Semitism, and that we can ensure that bigotry will not stand in our society. That is the importance of that topic.
And another part of the question they were asking is, whose fault is it that the Jewish community hasn't been or was not part of those conversations? I'm assuming they're referring, because they said, to George Floyd. What would you have liked to have seen regarding that?
You know, I'm not, so the one thing I try not to do is come into a community and say, here's how you should be doing things. Right? After I've just told you everything that you should do, I don't want to be the one. But I think I guess my point would be, I always want Jews at the table, right? I want Jewish people to be able to share their expertise, their knowledge, and to be a part of the conversation to understand how we as a community are moving forward. So I don't know exactly what has taken place here, but it's important that if we might not be in conversation with the right organizations or people. I know that the CEO of the Federation has a very good relationship with the head of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute, right? I know that the community together has been involved in many conversations over the years. Look, history is about ebb and flow. The Jewish history is in particular one of thrival, which is not really a word, and survival. I'm going to coin that term. I like that phrase too, thrival and survival. If my wife was here, she would probably kick me for what I just said. Yeah, that was ridiculous. I think it's important, though, that we create opportunities to come together. So whether it's churches and the synagogues or its involvement with other institutions, we as a Jewish community should continue to participate in leadership opportunities throughout the community. There have been Jews involved in the NAACP since its founding, right? In many communities across the United States, there are Jews on the board of the urban leagues, right? We should be a part of those institutions because it's the right thing to do. I hope I answered the question as best as I could.
And the last question, how do we respond to supersessionism? I feel that it's the most casual and common version of anti-Semitism.
I am not familiar with supersessionism.
I'm not either. But
Supersessionism?
yeah.
Supersessionism?
Concept that Jews have been succeeding in Christianity, and so that's the basis of prophetizing to them.
Oh, interesting.
It's okay to prophetize to them because they've been succeeded by it.
Oh, we are no longer the. Look, you know, one of the. Supersessionism. So the gentleman here said that supersessionism is that the Christianity has superseded Jews, so that Judaism is no longer chosen. We are no longer the chosen people, or our rules don't matter. Look, at the end of the day, we have to live in a society that accepts diversity, that accepts our differences. We don't want to live in a society that tolerates, right? My former CEO, David Harris, used to say two things. Number one, he hated the word tolerance, right? Why do you want to tolerate somebody, right? You don't want to tolerate somebody. Tolerance is not actually a very positive thought, right? Tolerance is just like, meh, meh, meh. You want to accept, you want to be willing to be with people. We need to ensure that we live in a society that is welcoming and accepting of all, right? Except for people, welcoming, accepting of everyone except those who have hateful opinions. And I think that's a very important line, right? I believe in pluralism. I believe that difference of opinion is very good. I even believe in talking to people who have hateful opinions, but I don't believe that I have to accept people's hateful opinions, nor do I believe that we should accept people's hateful opinions. So at the end of the day, it's important that we accept and welcome and create a community. As Dr. King used to say, a beloved community. We should be creating beloved communities every chance that we have.
All right. I think we're done. That's it.
Oh, Joyce.
I think we're done.
Are we done?
I think that's it.
You can take another if you
Oh.
want, or there might be someone who wants to raise their hand.
Is there anybody that didn't fill out a card that would like to ask a question?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I don't have a question. I just wanted
Oh.
to answer about George Floyd.
Oh.
That my niece works for a group called Urban Strategies, and she lives 2 blocks from where George Floyd was murdered. Neighborhood was destroyed, and she worked tirelessly before, and is working even much more so now
Yeah.
with all the families and the children to bring back the neighborhood and to help them and to educate. So I just
Yeah.
want, obviously she's only one person, but that group has put in a huge amount of attention.
Yeah. Yeah. I would just add, one of the unfortunate things that we saw was the destruction of communities as a result of the murder, which was unfortunate, and it was unfortunate for the communities, and especially the people that lived in those communities. I mean, you want people to feel safe. We all want people to feel, safe. And so, as much as we're welcoming, we have to be safe.
The only other thing on here was not a question for you. It was for Gary Palmer's representative. I don't know if he's still here or not. Is he? Okay.
We don't want to call them out.
Yeah, we don't want to call him. Yeah, so I was holding on to that one, maybe for,
Yeah.
okay, yes, exactly, there you go. And that's it for the question. Anybody else have a question? Ma'am?
Why do we eat apples and honey? Oh,
For a sweet
what is it?
tea.
So apples and honey is about a sweet and healthy and happy new year, right? No. Many in the Jewish, I don't know how, it's actually one of the things that's been sad for me. My mother sends out a Jewish New Year's card every year, and we have seen the number of Jewish New Year's cards dwindle over the past decade. In fact, I remember as a child getting, our house being covered in Jewish New Year's cards. Now most of our Jewish friends send out, well, not even emails. They send out they do a Facebook post, or they send out holiday cards around Christmas time, which is very uncomfortable for me. So I will just share a personal anecdote. My mother sends out her holiday cards are always creative. So last year she sent out apple tea as her New Year's card. One year she sent out sweet and low packets. She sent out honey sticks, a Coop apple lollipops one time, right? Different ways to share the sweetness of the holiday season with us all. Rabbi, did I do a good job of explaining that one? Thank you. All right.
We'll take one last.
Yeah.
Ma'am?
How anti-Semitic are the Messianic Jewish communities,
Oh.
synagogues,
Okay.
our family, and
Yeah.
others?
So I have 2 red lines at work. One is I will not serve on a panel with somebody who is anti-Israel. I won't do it. I will not give any legitimacy to somebody who is anti-Israel. The other is I will not serve or be a part of something with with people who identify themselves as Messianic Jews. Messianic Jews are those people otherwise known as Jews for Jesus. And unfortunately, many non-denominational churches oftentimes have an association with people who they see as Jewish, but in fact are Messianic Jews. So a number of years ago, I was invited, this is actually one of the craziest stories. Stone Mountain, everybody's familiar with Stone Mountain, right? Stone Mountain, the memorial, the disgusting memorial to the Confederacy. There was a group called the One Race Movement, and it was a black and white pastor whose purpose was to denounce racism. And through someone else, they denounced anti-Semitism. So they invited me on behalf of the Jewish community to attend a revival on top of Stone Mountain. It was really wonderful to attend a revival on top of Stone Mountain so that they could, in front of their 3,000 people, denounce anti-Semitism on behalf of the Christian community. And I was very honored that they had chosen to do that. And they had said to me, they're like, oh, and we have these other Jews that are gonna be there. And I was like, oh, who are the other Jews? And they said, oh, well, they're a part of this temple. And I was like, I've never heard of that temple. And I started looking into it. And I said to them, I go, look, I'm not here to tell you who you should or should not be associated with. I said, however, I, as a representative of the Jewish community, cannot be seen, nor will I be seen alongside those people who identify themselves as Jewish, because they are not. And it is very uncomfortable. So I'm not sure I'd say that they're anti-Semitic, but it is something that is very uncomfortable because you cannot be a Jewish person and believe in Jesus as your Savior. It doesn't work.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sheri. This is wonderful.
All right. I think we're done.
Thank you, Sheri and Dov. I'm going to start with an apology that is not written on here. I need to apologize because we have other city councilors present today that have not been recognized. We have members of the Mountain Brook City Council here that I'd like to ask rise and give a wave. And there may be another from Homewood and Vestavia as well. And that is my bad, and I take total responsibility for that one. And I also, just as long as I'm recognizing people, I think Phil has shown up, Phil Ensler, our representative from Montgomery. And I also want to ask all the educators and social workers that are here today that took time out of their very busy day to attend, if they would rise and we could recognize them. Wow. Thank you for being here. Good afternoon. Now I'll get to the printed remarks. I am Joyce Shevin, the director of the Jewish Community Relations Council of the Birmingham Jewish Federation. In this role, I serve as the face and voice of the Birmingham Jewish community in an effort to build bridges of understanding between our community and the broader community. Before I introduce my good friend Kimberly Cook, I just want to tell you a little bit about what JCRC does. We communicate with schools and civic organizations about the Jewish holidays, customs and practices, and for the schools, how they may affect your Jewish students. In addition, we address anti-Semitic incidents that may occur in our community and schools, real and perceived. Most importantly, along with our Jewish community partners, we confront anti-Semitism proactively by continually educating and advocating for our Jewish community locally and nationally, and by doing so, clearing up misconceptions, breaking through stereotypes, and calling out tropes. Today's program, hosted and facilitated by the Levitt Jewish Community Center, is a shining example of this mission. As more people understand our faith, more understanding results, and this is how we all can build a stronger community. A great moral voice, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, said, "Anti-Semitism is never ultimately about Jews. It is about a profound human failure to accept the fact that we are diverse and must create space for diversity if we are to preserve our humanity. Contact information is available at the table behind you. If you would like someone to speak to your organization on any subject related to Judaism or our Jewish community, please contact me and I will facilitate that opportunity for you. So, 2 years ago, I received a call from a community member who had seen a disturbing post on social media comparing vaccination cards to the yellow stars that Jews were required to wear during the Holocaust. The analogy was liked and responded to by a Vestavia Hills city councilor. I reached out to the counselor, Kimberly Cook, via email with a lengthy explanation of why comparing a vaccination card requirement applicable to everyone to the systematic murder of 6 million Jews, and why that is offensive to people of the Jewish faith. I truly did not expect to hear back from her, but I did. And what I received was a heartfelt and well-thought-out apology. I was so moved and frankly blown away. I asked Kimberly if I could share it with community members. We then met for coffee, along with my JCRC director then, David Romanoff. We talked at length about what led to this meeting, the dangers and power of social media, and I really got to know how spectacular Kimberly is. In addition to being a city councilor, Kimberly has served in a variety of leadership roles for Christian charitable organizations. She is active in her church, having taught youth Sunday school for over 20 years at Dawson Baptist Church. She serves on the Jefferson County Republican Party Executive Committee and the Alabama GOP Executive Committee. Kimberly has not only become a wonderful friend, but she has also become a tremendous resource to our JCRC work. I now smile when I think about what first brought us together. The shortest distance between two people is a story, and I'm honored to introduce my friend, Kimberly Cook, to share hers.
Joyce and I have great conversations. Since our very first meeting, when we meet and talk, I feel this kind of burning that you feel when you're talking to someone who gets you. When we met for coffee recently to discuss my part in this meeting, she taught me a new Yiddish word, beshert. Many of you know that word. I did not know it. Yiddish words, as I've learned from my Jewish friends, are words that have rich meaning, and it's often hard to explain to someone who is not of that culture. But Joyce explained that the word is related to the meaning of good fortune in the sense of relationships or being brought together. It is a distant relation to the word blessing. If one meets one's soulmate, the soulmate is one's beshert. Synonyms include fiance or heart friend. God's blessing by bringing two people together in relationship. It brings images of connection and C.S. Lewis's oft-quoted definition of a friend, which is someone to whom you say, "What, you two?" I'm here today because Joyce asked me to share the story of how we came to be friends. Back in August of 2021, I made a comment agreeing with a friend on social media that requiring vaccine passports was the, quote, perfect analogy to Jewish people being labeled with yellow stars during the Holocaust. As I typed those words, I barely gave it a thought, given the many words that I had typed on social media that day. It did not even register. Quickly typed, quickly out of mind, a like here, one there. It was all innocent, flippant, thoughtless, meaningless. That is, until I listened to a voice message that night from an AL.com reporter. He wanted to know what I really meant by my comment on a friend's post. Did I really believe that vaccine passports were like Jewish yellow stars? As I listened to the reporter's calm, dispassionate voice on my phone, my heart flooded with hot shame. I instantly recognized that what I had said was wrong and insensitive. I knew that I had used foolish speech, and not for the last time, the words Facebook God flashed across my conscience. In that moment, the full weight of embarrassment that this would bring on my city, my family, my husband, and myself pressed on me like a cubic yard of concrete. Heart-pounding, soul-aching regret. What could one say? It was late on a Friday evening. My husband was out of town. I looked at my laptop sitting open on the bedclothes, and I just wanted to crawl underneath it. But I needed to return his call, and I needed to do it quickly before he could type no comment. What was there to say except that I had been wrong to say that one thing was like the other? I dialed the number, not knowing what I was going to say, not knowing what words would come out of my mouth, wondering if they would sound like the apology of every other public official who had been caught saying something foolish. The main thing I remember from my conversation with Howard Koplowitz was that he was kind. I told him about my mistake. Foolish, devastated, deep regret. Somehow I mashed up all those words into something that must have made some sense. I apologized, and I begged him to express my sincere apology to anyone that I'd offended. His headline was, Vestavia Hills City Councilor Apologizes. I was so grateful that he led with my apology. In the next hours, people began doxing me on Twitter, or whatever it is they call it these days. My city phone rang and people left anonymous, ugly messages. When I called the numbers back to apologize, they hung up on me. My husband told me to turn off my phone and go to bed. In the days that followed, I received angry, disappointed emails to which I replied with a specific explanation of how I had failed and an apology. And I still remember the words from some saying, "We always knew this is who you were." And this from people I had never met. The local paper published my full statement of apology to my constituents, some of whom are here today. But the emails and the ugly phone calls I received are etched forever in my memory. So over the next weekend, I retreated in days of solitude as my husband remained out of town. I spent time in reflection and prayer. Friends called me to pray over me. I cried, and then I cried some more. The words, Facebook God, continued to flash on the screen of my conscience. I realized that the hours that I spent on Facebook answering every tag, commenting on every friend's post, with the Facebook God constantly throwing me more and more fuel, populating my newsfeed with complaint and controversy. In the solitude of that weekend, I somehow found a place of gratitude for what had happened. I was actually grateful for what my failure had cost me, my pride and my Facebook God. I thanked God for his loving discipline that had yanked me back from the brink. I realized the time that I had wasted daily to accomplish absolutely nothing. I had wasted opportunities, fractured relationships, and diminished trust. In the following days, I stayed off of Facebook altogether. That weekend, I gave up things that didn't matter, but gained time for face-to-face conversations and also a new relationship. One of the people who reached out was Joyce Shevin. In her role as executive director of the JCRC, it is her job to confront reports of incidents of anti-Semitism and hate speech. She sent me a straightforward email and asked me to consider the effects of my reported speech on my community. I took the time to write a response, and that helped me to put on paper all of the thoughts that I'd had over that weekend. Joyce's reply to me was beautiful, hospitable, and understanding. Her acceptance of my apology gave me peace, and I asked to meet with her, so we sat down, the two of us and her lay leader, David Romanoff. I talked with them and shared what God had been teaching me, expressing my appreciation for our shared values and the God that we all served, our common roots of faith. We talked about my background, my friendships within the Jewish community, my visit to Krakow, the empty chairs, the Jewish ghetto, Schindler's factory, and my meeting with a Jewish friend's mother who had on her wrist tattooed a number by an Auschwitz prison guard. I asked how I could use this opportunity to help further JCRC's mission. We traded ideas for concrete ways Vestavia Hills could help members of the Jewish community know that they are a valued part of our community. I asked the city to purchase a menorah as part of our addition to our holiday decorations. I worked with Rabbi Levi Weinbaum and his wife Mushka to plan a Hanukkah celebration at City Hall. And through these interactions, I've gotten to know the Jewish people in my community better. And individuals have told me how much they appreciate these efforts. I have new Jewish friends, but more importantly, the JCRC and Vestavia Hills are in relationship now. When Joyce invited me to speak, she suggested a focus of how resolving issues like mine requires recognition, intentionality, and conciliation. My recognition of my error was a jerk back on my chain. My intentional search for meaning in the midst of my failure led me to a friendship with Joyce and a helpful relationship with JCRC. Now that third word, conciliation. I looked it up because I wanted to know the difference between conciliation and reconciliation. Conciliation is defined as an action resulting in peace and harmony. No doubt that occurred in the resolution of my error, and it is a laudable goal. But I would propose an even stronger mission, one of reconciliation. Reconciliation is described as a creative action that leaves more in its wake than peace and harmony. It creates a lasting, peaceful relationship between those who were once at war and those who are now on the same team. Before my error, I did not consider myself to be an enemy of the Jewish community, not by any stretch. But in my foolish speech, I had placed myself in opposition to my own faith and also to the Jewish community. I was not yielding myself to God's better plan and purpose for my life. To summarize, in achieving conciliation, we might have a temporary peace, a truce of sorts, but reconciliation leads to a lasting peace and trusting relationships. We cannot have that important thing called relationship without recognizing the offense, repenting, and forgiving. Had Joyce not accepted my apology in such a beautiful, loving way, we would not have had reconciliation, and I would be missing the benefits of this new important friendship. So this is what I pray for when I pray for world peace. I pray for a world in which people gain trusting relationships through reconciliation. A confession and an apology might bring momentary conciliation, but when someone reaches out with humility and they are met with forgiveness, this creates a lasting peace. I'm grateful for this invitation to speak to you today. It is my privilege to be here. And I'm very grateful that God brought Joyce and I together in Beshert. In parting, I wish you shalom, peace, and I pray that this kind of wisdom and awareness will bring us into reconciliation and relationship with one another. Thank you.
So I turned to Joyce and I said, how the heck do I follow that? I think the way I do that is I leave my notes and I put them to the side. And Kimberly, I thank you for your incredible bravery and that very, very heartfelt message. You've inspired me, and I hope that everybody here is also inspired. And what it leads me to think is, first of all, I need to introduce myself. My name is Lisa Bachman, and I am new to Birmingham. I am the new executive director of the Alabama Holocaust Education Center. Thank you. Thank you. Can I take this off? I'm not usually really good at podiums. Okay, so I'm going to take this off. What Kimberly's remarks have brought to the forefront of my mind is that this is very central to the work that we do at the Holocaust Center and that we will do as we grow. We're at a very pivotal moment. We have a brand new facility that we've just opened. It's not quite open to the public because we're finishing off a few little things, but we will be come November, and we're now in our soft open where we're welcoming, just some tours, some private tours. But when you hear a story such as what Kimberly just so eloquently stated, it impacts you. And that's what we do. Our mission compels us to use the history and lessons of the Holocaust, the stories of the people who perished and the survivors, because their sheer will, their resilience, their hope, it's life-changing. And so I invite you all to please come and join us. For the educators that are in this room, we are ready for field trips. So please come and see us. And if I haven't met you yet, please come introduce yourself to me, because I would really love to meet you. My husband and I are thoroughly enjoying being part of this community. Sharing this history, remembering the idea of never forgetting and taking action. It's funny, throughout the program, Dov, so many of your words, I had written down little notes, and I think the overriding theme that we can all get out of this is that we must use our voice. We must speak our truths and stand up for what we believe in. When you come to our center, you're going to hear the voices of Holocaust survivors telling you their stories. And the best way that we can honor them is to do the exact same thing and follow their lead and follow Kimberly's lead. So just a few thank yous, because I've been designated to wrap up the program. Brooke, thank you for allowing this program to take place at the JCC and for all of the beautiful and wonderful work that you do. We're very thankful to the Birmingham Jewish Federation and Foundation, I know Danny's in the back, for helping to fund this program. To Dov and Sheri, thank you for being here and for leading such a compelling and incredible conversation that was very insightful. And Joyce, thank you for all of your tireless work in putting this together. And of course, to all of you, thank you for being here. Being here is such an important step. Thank you for being part of this community.